Hi everyone. Today I thought I would introduce an idea that I've been talking to a lot of people about in my coaching sessions, and I thought I'd like to explore it here on YouTube as well, and that is mainly what is the relationship between MBTI and Enneagram? How can we look at it and how can we understand why certain types go better together? So why, I don't know, INTJs are more likely to be certain Enneagram types and not others, and how these kinds of things happen. So all about that in the next few minutes. And just before we begin, I just want to let you know, guys, that I offer coaching sessions in a one-on-one format via Zoom or Google Meets. The topics that I cover in my sessions are basically general life coaching and career coaching topics or areas, using elements such as MBTI, Enneagram, attachment styles, psychodrama techniques, communication styles, general interview preparation, or career path exploration. So if any of these sound of interest to you, if you'd be willing to work with me, then you can check out the link in the description of this video. It will redirect you to my website, and then you can find more information about how to book and so on and so forth. Otherwise, if you have any other questions, you can comment here on YouTube, or you can send me a direct message on Instagram or Facebook at INFJinxed. Okay, so again, thanks a lot for being with me. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. Now, speaking of MBTI and Enneagram and how these two systems kind of overlap and connect with each other. The way I like to see this is that MBTI is basically the structure of our minds. MBTI is like a skeleton that we are built on. Technically, we are born with our MBTI type, and it stays stable for our lives. Yes, we can develop certain parts of ourselves. Yes, we can become a healthier version of our type, but our type remains stable. At least this is what we know so far. This is what is believed so far. So MBTI is not so much about traits, okay? This is where things can become confusing, because other personality theories or systems look more at traits. The most popular personality theory is the Big Five, okay, which measures extroversion, it measures openness to experience, conscientiousness, neuroticism, agreeableness. These are all traits that we can measure and look at in people's behavior. Openness to experience means that someone is more likely to be interested in exploring new things, looking at new ideas, is generally open to novelty. Whereas someone who has a lower openness to experience, of course, is the opposite, okay? If someone is more agreeable, then they're more likely to be empathetic, to display an attitude that is more friendly and inviting to other people. And if the opposite is true, then the person might be a little bit more closed off, less likely to agree with others, more likely to sometimes engage in conflictual conversations, and so on and so forth. So you can see it's pretty straightforward. This is why the Big Five looks at traits, and this is why the Big Five is very easy to use in research. And there is much more research on the Big Five than there is on MBTI or Enneagram, because it looks at something that is much easier to do in an experimental context. I've also done 2 papers on the Big Five during my bachelor's degree in psychology and my master's in conflict analysis and management. I looked at how these Big Five traits correlate with emotional resilience in general, and then with emotional resilience to conflict. And I found that certain personality traits predispose people to suffer more, for example, because of conflict. One thing that I discovered was that people who are more agreeable are significantly more likely to suffer as a consequence of conflict, because they tend to bottle up their feelings with respect to that conflict, to not talk about what they really feel, to try to compromise, and then afterwards they're not really satisfied with the outcome. And there were other things as well. But what I'm trying to say is that the Big Five looks at traits, and this is what a lot of people think personality means, which is kind of true. But at the same time, when it comes to MBTI, and more specifically typology and what Carl Jung discussed in his original work, we don't really look at traits. Even though there are some patterns, some correlations between your MBTI type and certain traits, we look more at the structure of the mind. Okay, so what are those mental processes that you prioritize in your decision-making process? And what are those mental processes that you prioritize when it comes to absorbing information? So in the first case, thinking, feeling, whether it's TI, TE, FI, FE. In the second case, intuition or sensing, NI, NE, SI, SE. And the extroversion, introversion spectrum versus the judging, perceiving one are the ones that dictate the flow of these functions and the order, and you know all that. We've been talking about it in a lot of other videos. So basically, your MBTI creates this structure, this skeleton that you use in everyday life, okay? The skeleton that moves you in a certain direction, the skeleton that you build on. But that doesn't mean that it will directly influence certain traits. As you already know, being an extrovert in MBTI terms doesn't mean the same as being an extrovert in Big Five terms, or what we mean in general in society. Sometimes we have extroverts in MBTI who are quite shy and socially anxious and reserved, and we have introverts in MBTI terms who are not, okay? Or sometimes we have thinkers who are emotional and feelers who are logical, because of course a feeling does not mean that someone is incapable of using logic, or thinking does not mean that someone is incapable of having emotions and talking about emotions and expressing emotions and so on and so forth. Again, you know all that. So the skeleton is what we are born with and what we kind of create upon. We are born with it, I think, and we get into the world predisposed to notice certain things, predisposed to assume certain things, predisposed to kind of read between the lines in some contexts but not in others. You can imagine it like this picture, like this canvas, where you've got some sort of patterns, some kinds of drawings and colors, some kinds of materials and textures. And because of that baggage that you already come with in the world, the other things that happen around you are more likely to stick in some cases and less likely to stick in other cases. So, you know, if someone is born as an ESTJ, they will be more likely to notice and react to certain things in their environment as little children and later on in their lives as well. Whereas someone who's born with, I don't know, an INFJ preference might be less likely to react to the same things as the first person does, the ESTJ, and more likely to do it for other things. Because of that, a certain Enneagram type forms. Enneagram is believed to be more a result of nurture than nature, and MBTI more a result of nature than nurture. I'm not saying it's 100% true and we know for sure, but this is kind of the tendency that we tend to think in terms of. So your Enneagram type is more likely to form in your childhood as a result of the way that you interact with the world, as a result of how you were brought up, what kind of experiences you had, what kind of trauma you had. And here I don't just mean, you know, the drama trauma, okay, just the very bad things like being abused or something like that. I mean small things as well that could have hurt you in a certain way. And as a child, you don't always have the capacity to really understand and process all of those things. And because of that, you might be hurt more than you would be if you're an adult by the same kind of experience or by the same kind of, you know, things that happen to you after all. So you come with a preference that comes from your skeleton, from the MBTI type, and then you develop a certain preference towards a certain Enneagram type. And this is kind of nurture because it comes as a consequence of your experiences. If you grew up and you were severely lacking the message that you will be loved even if you don't perform and even if you don't have outstanding results, then you might have a preference or form a preference towards Enneagram 3. And this is especially more likely if you have a certain MBTI type that kind of connects to that. So if you are a ENTJ, for instance, it's more likely to develop an Enneagram 3 based on these experiences that you had, compared to if you're an INFP, for instance, who are much less likely to develop the Enneagram 3 personality structure. So this is how I like to see it you have the skeleton, and then Enneagram is basically the soul that you cannot really see and touch. This is why Enneagram is much more about your fears. Enneagram is much more about your motivations, about the things that hurt you. Yes, you can also look at behavior, and there will be certain things that you can see relationships and correlations with or between. But Enneagram doesn't always come out the way you would expect it to. So it's very important to look at what is really the one thing that triggers you the most. What is the one thing that causes you the most stress, the strongest fear, the strongest stressor that would eventually motivate you to develop a certain behavioral strategy to kind of cope with that, okay? So you have the skeleton, you walk around the world using the skeleton, you have the experiences that of course are independent from you, but then the skeleton chooses some of these experiences, and that's how certain MBTI types make it more likely for you to develop a certain Enneagram type. So if you're an FJ in MBTI terms, you're much more likely to be an Enneagram 2 than anyone else. And you're much more likely to kind of read between the lines with your parents or caregivers and think that if you don't always focus on their feelings, if you don't always focus on helping them out, prioritizing their needs, they won't love you and you won't have self-worth because of that extroverted feeling that already kind of predisposes you to think in that way, okay? If you are a TI type, especially an ISTP or an INTP, with these experiences that you have, you're more likely to develop an Enneagram 5 preference than someone with an FJ preference, and so on and so forth. I don't know for sure if there is very conclusive research on the correlations between the two. In my opinion, it's possible to have any MBTI Enneagram combination. It's just that it's very unlikely in some cases, like an INFP Enneagram 8, or an INFJ Enneagram 7, or an ESTP Enneagram 4, or an ESTJ Enneagram 9. These are very unlikely, whereas some we see again and again and again, and they make a lot of sense. But I would like to keep an open mind about it, and I'm quite curious to explore how these very rare combinations occur and how often they actually do, if they do. Because I know there's a lot of these combinations that I've never seen in real life, but I want to keep my mind open because who knows, maybe it's possible. And I find it quite fascinating. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm curious to see how you visualize the combination between these personality or type theories. So share your thoughts about that in the comment section below. Again, thanks a lot for being with me. Thanks a lot for watching this video. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you next time.